Zarala had always known that her life would be defined by her royal bloodline, but it had never felt like a blessing. Born to the great King Galdor of the Hivar Kingdom, she was expected to be strong, skilled, and fearless, a worthy heir to the throne. But unlike the rest of her family, Zarala had never shown the same strength in battle. Her brothers and cousins were all warriors, skilled in combat, swift with their blades, and powerful in every way. They seemed to inherit the best qualities of their people, while Zarala was often seen as weak, even fragile. For years, Zarala tried to fit into the image of what a princess and future queen should be. She trained with the royal tutors, practicing sword fighting, learning tactics, and trying to catch up to her peers. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't keep up. Her hands were not quick enough, her movements too hesitant, and her mind too focused on her fear of failure. It was on one such afternoon, during a royal training session, that Zarala realized just how far she was from meeting the expectations placed on her. Her cousin, Jarek, had challenged her to a friendly duel. The others watched eagerly, knowing that Jarek was one of the kingdom's finest warriors. Zarala lifted her sword, but it felt heavier than it ever had before. She stood opposite Jarek, who grinned confidently, his stance relaxed and sure. "Are you ready, Zarala?" Jarek taunted, spinning his sword expertly in his hand. His voice was playful, but his eyes were filled with the expectation that she would fail. Zarala gritted her teeth, trying to push away the anxiety. She nodded, hoping she could at least make a decent showing of it. But as the duel began, it became clear to everyone that Zarala wasn't ready. She stumbled, misjudged her swing, and barely blocked Jarek's strike. The crowd murmured, some trying to hide their laughter, others offering sympathetic glances. In the end, Jarek knocked her sword from her hand with ease. She stood there, her heart pounding, as he smirked at her. "Well, that was a short duel," he said with a laugh, stepping back. "Better luck next time, cousin." The others in the crowd exchanged glances, some of them shaking their heads. Zarala's father, King Galdor, stood at the sidelines, his face a mask of disappointment. Zarala's cheeks burned with shame as she picked up her sword, her hands trembling. She wanted to disappear, to flee from the royal court and escape the stares of her family. But instead, she forced herself to stand tall, even as the weight of her failure pressed down on her. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay in her bed, staring up at the ceiling, her thoughts swirling. Was she truly useless? Did she not have what it took to lead the kingdom, to protect it from those who would try to harm it? She had never been able to live up to the legacy of her family. How could she ever rule when she couldn't even defend herself? Her mind kept returning to the faces of the people in the court, the pity in their eyes. They were all watching her, waiting for her to fail, and she had. She had failed them all. But as Zarala lay there, she knew one thing for sure. She was tired of being seen as weak. She was tired of being judged only by her failures. She didn't want to be the princess who was mocked behind her back, who was thought of as the useless heir. She didn't want to spend her life in the shadow of her more accomplished family members. Zarala had to change. She had to prove to herself and to everyone else that she was more than the princess who couldn't fight. She had to find a way to become strong. The next morning, Zarala stood in front of the mirror in her chambers, her reflection staring back at her. She had always been told she was beautiful, her long dark hair, her bright eyes, her elegant features, but beauty alone would not be enough to rule a kingdom. "Tomorrow," she whispered to herself, "I'll begin." It wasn't enough to just train harder. Zarala had always been a step behind, struggling to catch up. She would need someone to teach her, someone who would see her for more than the useless princess and help her become the warrior she needed to be. But where could she find such a mentor? The answer came to her sooner than she expected. During a diplomatic mission to the kingdom, A human soldier, John Drayton, had caught her attention. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a quiet strength about him, someone who had earned his reputation through actions, not words. He was different from the warriors in the court. He was disciplined, calm, and thoughtful in a way that Zarala admired. Zarala had overheard the generals speaking of his skill in combat. He wasn't just any soldier. He was an expert, trained in multiple forms of combat. He had been hired by the kingdom to teach the royal guard, but something about him intrigued Zarala. She couldn't help but think that perhaps he could teach her too. The idea formed in her mind slowly, but it grew stronger with each passing day. If she could convince John Drayton to train her, maybe, just maybe, she could become the warrior she longed to be. Maybe she could prove to her family and to herself that she was worthy of the throne. It was late in the evening when Zarala finally made her decision. She had waited until everyone in the palace was asleep, the quiet of the night offering her the solitude she needed to think clearly. She found John in the garden, his broad frame leaning against a stone pillar, gazing at the stars. He turned. As she approached, his eyes recognizing her but remaining calm, respectful. "Princess Zarala," he said with a nod. "What brings you here at this hour?" Zarala took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. "I need your help," she said, her voice steady. "I need you to train me." John raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. "Train you? For what?" "To become a warrior," she said simply. "I've spent my life in the shadow of my family, always falling short. But I won't be weak any longer. I want to fight, not just for myself, but for my kingdom." John studied her for a moment, then smiled, a glimmer of something, like respect in his eyes. "If you're serious about this, I'll train you. But you must understand, it won't be easy. It will take everything you've got." Zarala nodded, her heart pounding with excitement. This was the chance she had been waiting for, the chance to prove herself. "I'm ready," she said firmly. "I won't give up." And with that, Zarala's journey to becoming the warrior queen she was destined to be began. Zarala had never known a life outside the palace walls, her days filled with royal duties and ceremonies that she never truly cared for. The alien princess, born into a legacy of warriors, always felt like an outsider in her own family. She had grown up surrounded by the finest soldiers, the fiercest fighters, and the most skilled tacticians, yet none of those traits had been passed on to her. She had failed her family's expectations before she even had the chance to prove herself. The shame of being called useless haunted her every waking moment. She stood at the edge of the royal gardens, the soft breeze ruffling her dark silken hair as she gazed out at the grand city below. For years, she had been forced to wear the crown of being a failure. Her heart yearned for something more. She wanted to show her people, her father, and most of all herself, that she wasn't just a useless princess. She could be a leader. It was then that John Drayton approached her, his figure cutting through the distance like a warrior from another world. A human. A soldier. He had come to her world with a simple diplomatic mission, but he had seen something in her that no one else had. John, unlike her royal family, didn't look at her as a princess to be adored. He saw her as someone with untapped potential. "Zarala," he had said one evening, his voice calm and confident, "I know what they say about you, but I see a fighter in you, a leader. I can train you. I can teach you what it means to be strong. You don't have to accept being called useless." Her first reaction was skepticism. No one had ever believed in her before. Why should she trust a human? But there was something in his eyes, something earnest and full of promise. It made her wonder if perhaps he was the only person who saw what she could become. "I can't. I don't have the strength," Zarala had replied, shaking her head. feeling the weight of every insult she'd heard over the years. Strength comes from within, John had answered. But it also comes from the right training. You might not be a warrior now, but you can be, if you're willing to work for it. That was all it took. The spark of hope ignited in Zarala's heart. And despite the warnings from her family, she made a decision. She would train, not for anyone else, but for herself, to prove that she was worthy of the title she had been born into, and more. The next morning, she stole away from the palace. The guards, preoccupied with their usual duties, never noticed her absence. John had set up a secret location outside, the royal city, a training ground hidden within a dense forest, far from the prying eyes of the royal court. The air was thick with anticipation as she arrived. She had worn simple clothes, something easy to move in, and her heart raced with excitement. Today was the first day of her transformation. "Ready?" John asked as she approached, his expression serious yet encouraging. "I don't know what to expect," Zarala admitted, her voice betraying a mixture of fear and determination. John nodded. "Expect to fail, but expect to rise up every time you do. That's how you learn." They started with the basics. John instructed Zarala to stretch and focus on her body, to get a feel for the movements of a warrior. The exercises felt awkward at first, her muscles protesting against the unfamiliar motions. She was not accustomed to the discipline that came with training. Her people had always relied on their natural gifts, strength, speed, and combat instincts. But Zarala lacked all of those traits. "Relax," John said, watching her tense shoulders. "This is not about force. It's about control." She gritted her teeth, trying to find that elusive balance. For hours, they practiced basic stances, breathing exercises, and stretches. With every movement, Zarala felt a little more out of place. But she wasn't about to give up. The frustration built and the doubt crept in. Was she wasting her time? Was it too late for her to become anything but a failure? "Take a break," John said, sensing her frustration. "The mind is just as important as the body. Don't let self-doubt cloud your judgment." Sitting down on the grass, Zarala took a deep breath. She could hear the wind rustling through the trees, the distant sounds of the forest alive with life. She closed her eyes for a moment, imagining what it would feel like to stand tall, to wield a weapon with confidence, to protect those she cared about. This wasn't just about fighting, it was about reclaiming her sense of purpose. She wouldn't let the doubts from her family define her anymore. She stood up, more resolute than before, and turned to John. "Let's continue." John smiled, clearly impressed by her persistence. "Good. Now, we move to the next step." Over the following weeks, Zarala trained harder than she ever had in her life. John taught her how to use various weapons, swords, blades, and even some advanced human weapons. She learned the art of hand-to-hand combat, the discipline of mental focus, and the strategies used by great warriors throughout history, though her body still wasn't as strong as the seasoned soldiers she had grown. Up around, Zarala discovered that strength wasn't just about muscle. She learned to outthink her opponents, to use their movements against them, and to turn her perceived weakness into an advantage. Every time she stumbled or fell, John was there to encourage her, never allowing her to give up. One evening, after a long day of intense training, Zarala sat beside John, drenched in sweat, her body aching. But something had changed inside her. She could feel it. The pain was nothing compared to the satisfaction of knowing that she had grown stronger, that she was capable of more than anyone had ever believed. "You've come a long way," John said, sitting beside her on the grass. "How do you feel?" "I feel stronger," Zarala replied, her voice filled with quiet pride. "But I know I still have a long way to go." John nodded. "And you'll keep going. You've already proven that you have the heart of a warrior. The rest is just a matter of time." Zarala's gaze drifted to the horizon. The sun was setting, casting a golden light over the trees. She could imagine the future ahead of her, a future where she wasn't just a princess, but a warrior, a future where she would fight for what she believed in. And she knew deep down that this journey was only the beginning. Zarala's training had come a long way. Every day she pushed her limits further, each session leaving her more confident, yet more aware of how much she still had to learn. She had come from a place of being seen as useless to one where she was beginning to understand what it meant to be a leader, what it meant to be a warrior. But nothing in her training had prepared her for what was about to come. One evening, as the orange sun dipped below the horizon, Zarala stood in the training field, sweat dripping down her face, her breath heavy but steady. John was nearby, watching her closely as she practiced her sword techniques. The movements were becoming second nature to her, each slash, each thrust more precise. She had learned to trust her instincts, her body now working with a fluidity she had never thought possible. "You're getting better," John said, giving a rare smile. His approval was something she had come to cherish, a sign that she was on the right path. Zarala wiped the sweat from her brow and turned to him. "I still have a long way to go." "You're right," he agreed. "But there's something you need to prepare for." Before Zarala could ask what he meant, a loud roar echoed through the training grounds. It wasn't the roar of a wild animal, but something far more unsettling. The distant sound of war drums could be heard faintly in the air, carried on the wind. Zarala froze, her heart beating faster. John's expression hardened. "It's them!" "Who?" Zarala asked, her voice trembling with uncertainty. "Who's coming?" "An enemy faction," John replied. "They've been watching your planet for months. It's a matter of time before they strike, and it looks like they've chosen now." The words hit her hard. She had trained for this moment, but had she truly prepared? She was not a seasoned warrior yet. She had never been in a real battle. But her instincts kicked in as she reached for her sword, tightening her grip on the hilt. She had trained to fight for herself, but now she realized that there was more at stake than her personal journey. It was her people, her home, and her legacy that were on the line. "We need to warn the kingdom," Zarala said, her voice firm despite the fear creeping inside her. John shook his head. "It's too late for that. The attack is already underway. We don't have the luxury of waiting." Zarala's chest tightened. She had spent her life feeling like a failure, and now she was being thrown into a real fight. Could she live up to the expectations of her people, or would she once again prove them right that she was too weak? But then she remembered the countless hours of training, the lessons from John, the strength she had built inside herself. She wasn't going to let her people suffer because of her past. She had the power to make a difference. "We fight," Zarala said, determination flashing in her eyes. "We defend the kingdom." John nodded. "Then let's go." They quickly made their way to the royal palace, the sounds of battle growing louder as they approached. Zarala's heart raced as she passed through the palace gates, the guards recognizing her immediately but looking at her with doubt. They had always seen her as weak, someone who could never lead in battle. Would they trust her now? "Princess Zarala!" one of the guards called out as she approached. "What is happening? We need reinforcements. The enemy is breaking through the walls." Zarala's mind raced as she assessed the situation. The palace was under attack, but the main defenses had already been breached. Her father, the king, had failed to mobilize the army in time. She had to take charge now, even though she wasn't ready. But she couldn't let fear control her. Not now. She turned to the guard. "Gather any soldiers you can find. I'll lead a counterattack." The guard hesitated, clearly unsure of her abilities. But John stepped forward, his steady presence helping to convince the others that Zarala wasn't alone. "She's right," John said, his voice commanding. "She's trained for this." The guard nodded, though still doubtful. Zarala could see the uncertainty in his eyes, but she didn't have time to waste. She turned to John. "I need a plan." John quickly sketched out the battle strategy. The enemy was numerous, but they lacked the cohesion that a well-trained force would have. Zarala's strength lay in her ability to think strategically, not just in combat. Her mind was sharp, and she could see the weakness in their formation. The enemy wasn't expecting someone like her to step up. "We'll hit them where it hurts," Zarala said, her voice steady. "We'll take out their supply lines first. If they lose their supplies, they'll be forced to retreat." John gave her an approving nod. "Good. We'll move at dawn." As the night wore on, Zarala couldn't sleep. She stood at the edge of the royal balcony, looking out over the city. The moon was high in the sky, casting a silvery glow over the battlegrounds. She could hear the distant sounds of the battle, clashes of metal, shouts of pain and fear. She had always known that one day her world would be at war, but now that it was here, the weight of it felt heavier than ever. John joined her, his quiet footsteps barely making a sound on the stone floor. "You're ready," he said softly. Zarala shook her head, a mixture of anxiety and determination rising in her chest. "I don't know. What if I fail?" "You won't fail," John replied. "You've already proven yourself. Now it's time to show them all who you really are." His words rang in her ears as she stepped into the night. She was ready. She had to be. The next day, Zarala led the charge against the enemy. The battle was fierce and chaotic, but Zarala's training shone through. She moved through the battlefield like a force of nature, her sword cutting through the enemy ranks with precision. Her tactics, honed in her secret training with John, proved effective, as she quickly identified key points in the enemy's strategy and took them down one by one. As the enemy forces began to retreat, Zarala's soldiers, who had once doubted her, now rallied behind her. The momentum shifted. She wasn't just a princess anymore. She was a leader, a warrior, and the future of her kingdom. When the last of the enemy forces were driven out, Zarala stood amidst the battlefield, her sword raised high. She was covered in dirt and blood, her armor dented and scratched. But she had won. The victory was hers, and it was only the beginning of what she would accomplish. As the soldiers cheered, Zarala felt something inside her shift. She wasn't just the useless princess anymore. She had proven her worth, not only to her people but to herself. She had fought for her kingdom, and in doing so, she had become the warrior queen she was always meant to be. The victory over the enemy faction had been hard won, but Zarala could hardly enjoy it. Though she had led her people to safety and earned their respect, something deep within her was unsettled. She had fought for her kingdom, for her people, and for her place as a leader. Yet the more she stood among her soldiers, the more she sensed the shadows of doubt creeping in. The palace, which once felt like a home, now felt like a cage. It was full of voices, whispers that criticized her every decision, second-guessed her every move. She had earned their respect on the battlefield, but respect didn't always translate into trust. Despite the victory, Zarala knew her real test had only just begun. As she sat in her private chambers, looking over battle reports, her mind was preoccupied. John had returned to the training grounds, helping with the rebuilding of the city's defenses, but Zarala remained in the palace, unsure of what to do next. Her father, King Galdor, still had the final say on everything, even though Zarala had just proven that she could lead her people. The door to her chambers opened with a soft creak. Zarala didn't look up immediately, knowing it was one of her advisors, but the voice that spoke was not the familiar one of a trusted ally. "Princess Zarala, may I have a moment of your time?" Zarala looked up, her heart sinking as she saw her cousin, Jarek, standing in the doorway. His tall figure loomed over her, and though his face was painted with a practiced smile, Zarala could see the coldness in his eyes. Jarek had always been one to talk about power, about the throne, and about destiny. He had always believed that one day he would be the ruler of the kingdom, and Zarala had always known that he hated her for being born before him. "Of course, cousin," Zarala replied, trying to hide the unease in her voice. "What brings you here?" Jarek stepped into the room, his gaze flickering to the piles of battle reports scattered across Zarala's desk. "I heard about the battle. Impressive, I must admit. But I wonder, Princess, how much of it was luck and how much was skill?" Zarala clenched her fists under the table, but she didn't let her anger show. "It was skill, Jarek. I led the charge. I didn't rely on luck." He chuckled softly, walking closer to her. "Ah, yes, but even the greatest warrior needs more than skill, don't they? They need support. They need a strong army behind them. They need—" His eyes narrowed as he leaned in closer. "The right leadership." Zarala's heart pounded in her chest. She could see the threat in his words. Jarek had always been a manipulator, always looking for ways to climb the ladder of power. And now, it was clear to her that he saw her as an obstacle in his way. "I don't need your support, Jarek," Zarala said, her voice cold and firm. "I've earned the trust of the people. I've proven myself." "Proven yourself?" Jarek scoffed. "You think they respect you for defeating a few invaders? They are waiting for a leader who can secure the throne, someone who understands the true power of this kingdom." Zarala stood up from her chair, glaring at him. "And you think you're that person? You believe you deserve the throne more than I do?" Jarek smirked, and for a moment, Zarala could see the full extent of his ambition. "I never said that, cousin. But you have to admit, your actions have stirred the pot. There are many who believe you are not fit to rule. There are whispers in the court, Zarala. They question your ability to lead. Then let them question. I've led them to victory. I've proven I can do this." Jarek's expression shifted, and the smile on his face became more sinister. "I'm not talking about victory on the battlefield, Zarala. I'm talking about something much more important." Zarala stepped back, sensing the change in the air. "What are you implying?" Before he could answer, the doors to her chambers flew open again, and one of her most trusted soldiers, Orcs, stepped inside. His face was pale and there was fear in his eyes. "Princess, you need to come quickly. Something has happened." Zarala's heart sank, her instincts telling her that something was terribly wrong. "What is it, Orcs?" "There's been an attack on the royal vault," Orcs said, his voice shaking. "Someone has stolen a large portion of the kingdom's treasure, and the guards say it was one of your own men." Zarala's mind raced. "Who? Who would do this?" Orcs looked at Jarek, then back at Zarala. "It's been traced to one of Jarek's personal guards." Zarala's eyes widened. She turned to face Jarek, but he was already smiling. "I told you," Jarek said softly, his voice full of quiet satisfaction. "A leader must know how to play the game, Zarala. You're too naive to understand. You think this kingdom is yours? You've only just started to scratch the surface." Zarala's hands shook as she reached for her sword. She felt betrayed, hurt, and angry. "You planned this." Jarek's smirk deepened. "Of course. I knew that you would never truly be accepted as queen. Not by the people. Not by the court. So I made sure to help them see the truth." Zarala took a step toward him, but Orcs quickly grabbed her arm. "Princess, we need to go. This is a trap." "No," Zarala said, her voice rising with fury. "He's not getting away with this." But Jarek wasn't done. "You should have known, Zarala. You should have known that power always comes with a price." As the reality of Jarek's betrayal hit her, Zarala realized something. She was no longer just fighting for respect. She was fighting for her life, for the future of her kingdom. With the weight of the crown heavy on her head, Zarala made a decision. She would not let Jarek steal her throne. She would not let him tear apart everything she had worked so hard to build. No matter what it took, she would fight to protect her kingdom, and this time, she wouldn't be fighting alone. The betrayal had hit Zarala harder than anything she could have imagined. Her cousin Jarek had stolen from the kingdom, trying to undermine everything she had worked so hard for. He believed the throne was his by right, but Zarala was determined to prove him wrong. This wasn't just about the treasure. It was about control, power, and a battle for the future of the kingdom. Zarala's heart burned with a new sense of purpose. She had already proven herself on the battlefield, but now she had to prove her worth as a ruler. She couldn't afford to show weakness. The kingdom was hers to protect, and she would not let anyone, especially Jarek, tear it apart. She paced back and forth in her chamber, her mind racing. She had been betrayed by someone she had trusted, someone within her own family. The king had been silent on the matter, his support torn between his daughter and his ambitious nephew. Zarala couldn't wait for anyone to decide her fate. She had to take charge. But how? Jarek had powerful allies, people who shared his ambitions, and would support his claim to the throne. Zarala's first step was to gather loyal supporters. She trusted only a few in the palace now, but among them was Arik, her most reliable soldier, who had always been by her side. He had proven his loyalty during the battle and had followed her when the stakes were high. Now he would be her most trusted advisor. Together they would form a plan to reclaim her throne. That night, they met in secret, away from prying eyes. The palace's corridors were empty, save for a few guards, who seemed to be growing more suspicious of Zarala's actions. But she knew that their loyalty was in question now. "I've sent word to the generals who fought with you during the last battle," Arik said, his face serious. "They will be here by morning. They know what's at stake. They know what we need to do." Zarala nodded, her mind focused. "I need them on my side. If we move quickly, we can take back control before Jarek can rally his supporters." The weight of the plan rested heavily on her shoulders. The palace had always been a place of luxury, of wealth and privilege, but it was also a place of intrigue, deception, and power struggles. The loyalty of her people would be key in what was to come. She couldn't allow Jarek's lies to spread any further. The first step in their plan was to secure the support of the generals. These were the men and women who had fought with Zarala, the ones who had seen her rise from the weak, mocked princess to the confident, capable leader she had become. They were her true allies, the ones who respected her not just for her bloodline, but for her strength. As dawn broke the next day, Zarala met with the generals in a hidden chamber beneath the palace. The atmosphere was tense, but there was no mistaking the respect they held for her. "You've done well, Princess," General Valen said, his gruff voice matching the seriousness in his eyes. "Your leadership in the battle was the turning point. We've all seen it." Zarala met his gaze with determination. "We need to do more than fight Jarek's army. We need to expose him. He's stolen from this kingdom, and he's tried to turn the court against me." "We know," said another general, Lady Mira. "The whispers are growing louder. People are starting to question your leadership, Zarala. But not all of us believe Jarek's lies. We stand with you." Zarala felt a sense of relief wash over her. These generals, these warriors would help her reclaim the throne, but she knew that their loyalty alone wouldn't be enough. She had to expose Jarek's betrayal to the entire kingdom. The people had to see him for who he truly was. "We need to bring him to justice," Zarala said. "We need to do this quickly, before Jarek can turn the people against me any further." The generals nodded in agreement. "We'll send word to the common people," General Valen said. "The soldiers will be prepared. We'll bring Jarek's forces to their knees before he has a chance to organize." Zarala smiled for the first time in days. The plan was taking shape. They would move quickly and decisively. Jarek would not have time to react. but there was one more thing she needed to do. She had to face her father, King Galdor. It was time to confront him and make him choose a side. She couldn't afford to let him remain neutral. He had the power to end this conflict before it even began, and Zarala knew that he still had some affection for her. She hoped that deep down, he would see the truth, that she was the rightful ruler. The next day, Zarala stood before her, father in the royal court. The king sat on his grand throne, his face unreadable. He was a tall man with the same commanding presence as Zarala, but he lacked the spark in his eyes that she had inherited. He had always been more concerned with appearances, with power, than with the well-being of his people. "Father," Zarala began, her voice steady, "it's time for you to choose. Jarek has betrayed the kingdom, and you know it. He has stolen from us, and he's tried to manipulate the court to his advantage. I'm not asking for your approval. I'm demanding your support." King Galdor's expression remained neutral, but Zarala could see the flicker of hesitation in his eyes. He had always been a man who valued strength, and Zarala had proven that she was capable of leading. But she also knew that her father had always wanted power for himself, and he had never fully accepted her leadership. "You think I would choose you over Jarek?" the king finally asked, his voice heavy with doubt. "He is my blood, Zarala. He is my nephew. He has always been more ambitious, more suited for the throne than you." Zarala felt her chest tighten at his words. She had always hoped her father would see her as more than just his daughter. She had hoped he would recognize that she was not just the heir to the throne by birthright, but by merit. "I have fought for this kingdom, Father. I've proven my worth," Zarala said, her voice rising with the weight of her conviction. "Jarek is using you just as he's used everyone else. He's not a leader. He's a traitor." The king's eyes hardened. "And you think you can lead better than him?" "Yes," Zarala said without hesitation. "I know I can." For a moment, there was silence in the court. The tension was thick, but Zarala refused to look away from her father. She could feel the future of the kingdom hanging in the balance. This was it. This was the moment that would decide everything. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the king spoke. "Then prove it," he said, his voice cold. "Prove that you can lead." Zarala nodded, understanding the challenge. This was her chance. She would prove her worth not just to her father, but to everyone who had doubted her. As she left the court, she knew one thing for certain. The reclamation of her throne had begun. Zarala stood on the balcony, looking out over the kingdom. The sun was rising, casting its golden light over the city below. The streets, once bustling with the noise of celebrations and royal events, now seemed quieter, more solemn. Her people were waiting for her to show them the strength they needed to believe in her. She had fought for the throne, but now she had to show them that she could rule it. The past few weeks had been nothing short of a whirlwind. After her father's reluctant approval, Zarala had called for action. She had gathered her loyal generals and soldiers, rallying them against the threat Jarek posed to her kingdom. With her military strategy and the support of the court's most loyal figures, she had started to rebuild her claim. But the path to the throne was never easy, and it wasn't just the army she had to fight. Jarek's influence spread far and wide, reaching the ears of even the most trusted members of the royal court. His lies and manipulation had planted seeds of doubt that Zarala was still trying to pull out. Yet one thing was clear to her. Her journey to the throne was not only about military might. It was about leadership, trust, and the ability to unite her people. She couldn't just lead with the sword. She had to lead with wisdom, compassion, and, most importantly, integrity. As she prepared to face her next challenge, a quiet knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," Zarala called, turning to face the door. Auric, her most trusted soldier and advisor, stepped into the room. His face was serious, his eyes betraying a mixture of concern and determination. "The time has come," Auric said softly, his voice steady. "Jarek has made his move. He's rallying his supporters in the Western Territories. If we don't act now, he could use them to launch a full-scale attack." Zarala felt the weight of the moment settle heavily on her shoulders. She had hoped this day wouldn't come so soon, but she had known it was inevitable. Jarek's ambition could not be ignored forever. "We're ready," Zarala said, her voice unwavering. "We'll take back control. I'll face him directly." Auric gave her a pointed look. "Are you sure about this? The court is still divided. Some are still loyal to him, and even though the army is with you, we need the support of the people. This needs to be more than just a battle. It needs to be a statement." Zarala nodded, her resolve strengthening. "I know. I've spent my whole life being told I wasn't strong enough. But I've learned that strength isn't just in fighting. It's in standing firm, even when everything is against you. I will be the queen my people need, not because I'm the strongest, but because I'm the one they can trust." Auric gave a small, approving nod. "Then let's do it." The next day, Zarala stood in front of her army, her gaze sweeping over the soldiers who had followed her from the beginning. They were a mix of seasoned warriors and newer recruits, but each one stood tall, ready to fight for her. The general's army was larger, but Zarala's strength lay not in the size of her force, but in their loyalty. She had earned their respect through her actions, not her birthright. "I stand before you not as a princess, but as your leader," Zarala called out, her voice ringing clear across the ranks. "I am not here because I was born into this role. I am here because I have fought for it, and I will continue to fight for each and every one of you. We do not just fight for the throne, we fight for the future of our kingdom." Her words resonated with the soldiers. They knew she was more than just a princess. They had seen her lead on the battlefield, seen her make difficult choices. She was their queen, and they would follow her. "Today, we march to reclaim what is ours," Zarala continued, her voice filled with fire. "We will show Jarek and anyone who dares to challenge us that we are a force to be reckoned with. We will fight for honor, for justice, and for the kingdom we love." The soldiers erupted in cheers, their voices full of pride and determination. Zarala turned to Auric, who had been standing by her side. "It's time," she said. The journey to the Western Territories was long and dangerous. Zarala led her army through dense forests and across rugged terrain, never once showing doubt. The soldiers followed her, knowing that she was more than capable of leading them to victory. Along the way, she spoke with her commanders, ensuring that every aspect of their strategy was in place. They needed to outmaneuver Jarek's forces and strike at his heart. When they finally reached the outskirts of Jarek's stronghold, Zarala could feel the tension in the air. This would be the final test of her leadership. She had come this far. There was no turning back now. Under the cover of night, Zarala's army moved into position. They were ready. But as they prepared for the final battle, she found herself standing at the edge of the battlefield, looking across the distance at the enemy camp. She could see Jarek's forces gathering, his banners flying high. Auric approached her, sensing her unease. "Are you ready?" Zarala nodded, her grip tightening around her sword. "I've never been more ready." The battle began at dawn, with both sides clashing in a violent storm of steel and fire. Zarala led the charge, her sword cutting through the air with precision. Her movements were fluid, each strike a calculated step in a larger dance. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for her people, for the kingdom that was hers to protect. The fighting was fierce, but Zarala's soldiers were relentless. They fought not just because they had been ordered to, but because they believed in her. They knew that if they won this battle, they would secure the future of their kingdom. As the battle raged on, Zarala saw Jarek on the other side of the field. He stood tall, his own soldiers rallying around him. He saw her, too, and for a moment, their eyes met across the chaos of the battlefield. A silent challenge passed between them. This was the moment that would define everything. Zarala pushed forward, cutting through the enemy ranks. She fought with a strength and determination she had never known before. With every step, she moved closer to Jarek. She knew that this confrontation was inevitable, but she also knew that it would determine the fate of the kingdom. Finally, she reached him. The two of them stood face to face, the noise of the battlefield fading into the background as their eyes locked. "You think you can take what's mine?" Jarek sneered, his voice cold. "I think you've already taken enough," Zarala replied, her voice steady. With a swift motion, she raised her sword, ready for the final clash. But this time she wasn't fighting for revenge. She wasn't fighting for power. She was fighting for justice, for the people she had sworn to protect. The battle between them was fierce, but Zarala's skill and determination shone through. She had trained for this moment, and in the end, it was her strength, both in body and spirit, that won out. Jarek fell to the ground, defeated. The soldiers loyal to him surrendered, and Zarala's army stood victorious.